The European Union has recently unveiled the Net Zero Industry Act and the Critical Raw Materials Act as part of the Green Deal Industrial Plan. In line with this, the European Union has set a target of producing by 2030 at least 40% of the products it needs for net zero technologies, such as solar power or fuel cells. About 23 trillion euros of this investment, an average of 800 billion euros a year, would come from redirecting investments that would otherwise have funded carbon-intensive technologies. This amounts to roughly 25% of the annual capital investments now made in the European Union, or 4% of the current EU GDP. To meet climate targets, the European mining and metals industry must develop and commercialize new low CO2 technologies within the next 5-10 years. Our panel of experts will discuss the challenges and opportunities in the green energy transition. Speakers will also unveil cutting-edge projects aimed at eliminating greenhouse gas emissions while simultaneously ensuring the production of strategic raw materials crucial to the European steel-making industry.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day 2 of this conference. So today we're going to be covering net zero. We will be covering the programme of how the European Union is looking to move towards reducing emissions. We'll be covering the legal aspects, we'll be covering some of the technical aspects, we'll be covering some of the financial elements. And given that we are in a coal mining district, what can be done with coal? Is it totally a dirty material, or is there opportunities to actually reduce the emissions significantly as part of the just transition and moving towards a sustainable future? So, to kick things off, I'd like to invite Bernard Meyer, counsel for Signature Litigation, to talk about the legal challenges and opportunities in the green energy sector.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Arthur, for having me. When I prepared these slides, I didn't know that I was going to have the 9:30 a.m. slot, so they're a bit more dense than I think we can all stomach. So I'm going to try to keep it very short. As a lawyer, I could obviously talk for hours, but Arthur has given me 10 minutes, so I'm going to be quick and see if this works. Great. So, challenges and opportunities of net zero from a legal perspective. The first topic I wanted to talk about is fragmentation of laws. So, we're all in this room from very different backgrounds, and as such our laws in Europe and around the world, if you have a mining project, it's not just the law of the country that you're operating in, but it's also extraterritorial laws that you're subject to, and those are increasing. So the German beautifully named Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz is as easy as it sounds. It applies extraterritorially, so if you have issues in your supply chain, there is a risk that you could become subject to the German law and subject to the German authorities' jurisdiction. There's the UK Bribery Act, there's the FCPA, there's the EU Conflict Minerals Regulation. They all have extraterritorial reach and are therefore to be considered in any kind of mining project. The other challenge is a threat to national and international rule of law. That's perhaps the one that I'm the most worried about, because there were only a few years ago very fundamental principles, like everyone is entitled to a lawyer, everyone is entitled to representation, everyone can get the lawyers they can afford. There's a move against that. So the International Bar Association is currently considering changes, which means that lawyers will have to consider their clients' ethical and moral standing in the community before deciding whether to take on a client. So it is no longer the case that anyone can come to signature litigation in London, knock on the door, say, please represent us. But we now have to ask questions. We need to say, is that individual sanctioned? Is that individual or company at risk of being sanctioned? And what we've been seeing repeatedly over the last 12 months is that sanctions are actually being used to as a political and commercial tool to try to get projects, take projects away from other people. So if you have a very profitable mine somewhere and you have sanctions imposed against you, that could be politically motivated rather than actually to do with your operations. And that has huge ramifications. It has consequences for whether you can have bank accounts, where you can have bank accounts, which lawyers you can retain, if you can travel. It's becoming quite a heated area, and one where it's not just as easy as it used to be a few years ago. The next one I want to talk about very briefly is the third bullet point here, commercial and political circumstances. As Graham said yesterday, the sort of early life of a mine is very, very important. And the Norwegian example is actually quite interesting, not just from a mining perspective, but from a renewables perspective, because there is a big project up there, a wind project, consortium of a number of companies. They've built the turbines. They've actually become operational, 151 wind turbines. And a few years ago, the Sami people brought a claim before the Norwegian courts to say, well, actually these wind turbines interfere with our reindeer husbandry, and not because they're really in the way, but because the noise of the turbines disturbs the reindeer. And so it interferes with their cultural rights. So the Norwegian legal system had to balance the interests of its indigenous people with the commercial interests of a consortium of international companies having spent billions in building this project. Now the Norwegian court actually ruled in favor of the Sami people, but that's not where it stops, because then what is the solution? Is the solution just to tear all the wind turbines down immediately? Well, it turns out they don't know the answer. So our friend Greta Thunberg 5 days ago went and chained herself to the outside of the parliament in Norway to say, please stop this. I'm very upset that the Sami people are not getting their rights. But the answer is really nuanced, and nobody really knows the answer. So it's really important to think about it from all sorts of different angles. There's another point I wanted to mention about the social license. There's a very interesting case in South Africa a few years ago, where Shell had been given a permit to do a seismic study, and the locals took Shell to court and said this approval, this grant, is illegal because they weren't given meaningful rights to represent themselves and to comment on the project. And the court actually found in favor of the indigenous people because the court really scrutinized what Shell had done to give them a right to representation. So they looked at what kind of language the documents were in. They looked at where the meetings were being held to listen to the local stakeholders. And the court found that the meetings were set hundreds of kilometers away from where the indigenous people lived. So they couldn't travel there, so they couldn't actually make their voices heard. They couldn't even read the papers because they weren't translated into the local dialect. And so the seismic approval was overturned and denied. So I think it's very important to think about it step by step and really be quite proactive in due diligence, in setting up the project from the very beginning. Increased accountability of states, which is the fourth bullet point. Again, in net zero, that's a huge positive motivator, but it also takes a lot of state resources. So you might be aware of the case that was brought before the European Court of Human Rights a few weeks ago. The hearing was a few weeks ago, where a number of Portuguese teenagers sued European states and said that actually by not reducing the temperature increase to 1.5, they breached their right to life under the European Convention of Human Rights. Now that absorbs a huge amount of resources on the part of the states to defend themselves and to think proactively and plan. And it's something that we need to be aware of also in assessing the state's bandwidth in terms of what to deal with net zero. Accountability of private players, I probably don't need to go into this here because most of us are private actors, and so we know what the accountability here is. I will also say that with technology, it's becoming a lot more difficult to hide. So Benny Steinmetz, I think, was a good example. The case against him in Switzerland was based on emails and electronic documents that they found. So whereas many years ago wrongdoings were relatively easy to hide, you could just sort of hand a big bag of cash to someone and no one would ever know. Today there's a trace of everything. Today there's WhatsApp, email, there's actually an electronic footprint. So whatever you do in the business context, I think the safe assumption is that somebody is listening. And I think that's something we're seeing a lot more in our practice, that documents, communications that people thought were private are not actually private. Dire public finances, I think, is a big challenge. If just thinking about now sort of redirecting aid to Israel, no longer being available to Ukraine, that applies in mining as well. Mali recently changed its tax code to take more for the public purse. We're seeing a lot of retroactive tax claims where governments promised one thing, but then a few years later said, well, actually, we'd like to change that regulation and take a bit more for the public profit purse. We're seeing that a lot more, so that's something to be considered in this context. Now, the opportunities, there are many opportunities. I think starting with the fourth bullet point, actually, the vast demand for critical minerals is something we're all aware of, and I think from a commercial perspective, that's the sort of leading concept, but it's subject to the other bullet points on this slide, which is the recommendation is to think big, but to act local. So to think big, think about what potential consequences, effects a project could have, anticipate developments, think 5 years, think what if there's an election, how will that change? The question yesterday was so fascinating about social license, to see how does a social license embed itself in a project through the various owners, through the various stages, and it's a difficult question, but it's an important one, and we're seeing this at the back end in disputes where courts and tribunals ask that question. They say, what did you do at the very beginning? How did you make sure that local interests were being respected? And immediate stakeholders, very powerful. I mean, just to take the Sami, Graham and I spoke about this yesterday. I mean, it's a very, very small proportion of the Norwegian population, and yet they are having a lot of net zero companies very scared right now because they're saying, what about our rights? And the net zero companies have made billions of dollars of investment, and yet the project is really under threat. And the challenge with projects like that is, if they're not structured properly from the outset, they are going to be left to the national courts. And in Norway, the national courts are, I would say, probably quite trustworthy. I would say probably one of the least corrupt countries in the world, and rule of law and democracy and so forth. But if you have to go to a court in Other jurisdictions, I know the term Global South is no longer in any way politically acceptable because it's factually, politically, legally completely wrong, but if you are a stakeholder and you have a case before local courts in the Global South, that's probably not as reassuring as in Norway. And so you should really maneuver the international playing field through appropriate advisors. The key sponsors here, SRK, and there are lots of advisors here. A good friend of mine has a consultancy in Berlin, business and human rights consultancy. He started out with, I think, 3 people, and he's now got 30. So he regularly lectures, he regularly teaches mining companies as well on how to deal with supply chain due diligence, how to deal with upstream contractors, downstream contractors. So answering questions like the one about the social license yesterday. And yep, that's it from a 9:30 perspective. And just here are our lovely pictures and email addresses. So any questions, comments, call us. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for keeping on time. So please keep your questions in mind. We'll be having some time at the end of this, hopefully, to be able to go through things.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself and company I'm representing. My name is Robert Ostrowski. I'm Chief Financial Officer in JSW. The full name of the company is Jastrzębska Spółka Węglowa, it's the Polish name. And we are stock listed company since 2011, so it's quite a long history of being a public company. So that's the reason, that's why it's the reason why all this, obligatory law in reference to environmental protection is referring to our company as well. So that's why our strategy is reflecting back all these environmental goals as well. And the title of my presentation is The Green Transition in Practice. How to finance mining industry, mining companies in Poland, but not only Poland, that are going to reduce emissions, having negative impact on the environment. And JSW with modern SLL financing, SLL is the abbreviation from Sustainable Linked Loan, which we received and signed agreement with financial institutions this year. Maybe I will start with the slide number 4, just to introduce the company. Who we are. We are coal mining company. Of course, the coal maybe sounds not positively from this perspective of environmental protection, but we are the largest producer of coking coal in Europe, almost the only one on the map of Europe. We have 4 mines with average yearly capacity of in range of 14 million tons of coking coal, and the recoverable coal resources for next years is in range of 1.2 billion tons of coking coal. That means that we have the cover for demand expressed by our customers for next 50-60 years. That's the first segment of our business core. The another one is related to processing of coking coal in order to produce coke. And we have 3 facilities in Silesia region, producing in average 3.5 million tons of coke. There are some byproducts like coke oven gas, like tar, ammonium sulfate, and liquid sulfur. Why it is important in terms of green transition and all these green policies introduced by Green Deal, Fit for 55, or Paris Agreement? Because we are the first link in chain of value of the implementation of green transition in industry in Europe and in the industry at all. We say that the green transition begins 1,000 meters deep underground in mines of JSW. Why? I will move back to the slide number 2. What is the importance of coking coal and coke in transition of the economy at all? Of course, we know that a very important element of the transition is to replace the energy sector, based in Poland especially, on steam coal, which is a completely different product comparing to coking coal, with new sources of energy production in form of renewables. And you can imagine that in order to produce one wind turbine, we use on average 140 tons of steel, different forms of products. How we produce steel? We have 2 ways to produce steel. The most popular, it covers 72% of facilities around the world, is the traditional using blast furnaces. It's the sinter plant, blast furnace, further steps to produce steel products. And there are 2 raw materials used to produce steel at this initial stage of production. This iron ore and coke. The coke produced by, among others, JSW. And in average, to produce one wind turbine, we need 140 tons of steel. To produce 1 ton of steel, we need 400 kilograms of coke. To produce 400 kilograms of coke, we need 560 kilograms of coking coal. So that's the first element in this value chain. So as we want to implement all these climate goals, we need to use not only rare earth metals, which is the main element in this, new and modern technologies implementation, but we need just only and simple coking coal as well. And there are no alternatives to replace coking coal with another, way of production. Of course, in place we have electric arms as well, like blast furnaces, which are producing liquid steel using scrap, and we don't need coking coal or coke to this production way at all. So that's the importance of our production or coal business for the transition of the world. We of course are a member of many associations dealing in this market of critical raw materials in Europe. And we are on the list of critical raw materials published by European Union. So this year it was like updated list, and we are still on the list as important raw material for the transition of the industry in Europe and for the Commonwealth of people living here. There is a map of critical raw materials in the world. There are few countries having the access to resources of raw materials, critical raw materials. And on the list, we see on the map countries like China, like USA, Russia, like Australia. And there are 2 countries from European Union, I mean France and Spain. There's one more, Poland, with coking coal resources as well. And of course, because we take full responsibility for the strategy of the company, for the future of the company, because we have this perspective for our existence for next 50, 60 years, and we are a very important element of this value chain on the way for the, to get like neutral to the climate from perspective of industry and coking coal as well. So that's the way and the reason why we introduced environmental strategy, the core business strategy, which we announced in 2022. And we try to do our best to follow our goals we presented in this strategy. There are 4 key areas of the action to benefit to the environmental and the climate. The first of all is the protection of the earth and to reduce the carbon footprint related to our business. Apart from the coal, coking coal we are producing, we excavate with coal, it's like a system byproduct, methane. It's the gas affecting climate changes, that's why we plan, we have to implement many actions to reduce the issuance or emission of methane to the atmosphere. We produce, as I said before, 14 million tons in average coking coal, and by the way, per year, roughly 390 million cubic meters of methane, which is issued to the atmosphere. And we have a challenge or ambition to reduce the emission of methane to the atmosphere by implementing three specific measured goals. First of all, to reduce the reduction by 2030, according to our strategy, by 30%, in reference to the year 2018. It is over 3.5 million tons of CO2 to the atmosphere. Then we plan to increase the capture of methane at all, up to 50%. Now it is roughly 38%. And we plan to utilize the methane we captured up to 95%. So the medium-term goal, according to our strategy, is to reduce carbon footprint of the company by 2030 by 30%, and to get climate neutrality by 2050. How are we going to implement our environmental goals? First of all, apart from the strategy, we need long-term stable financing supporting our investment plans, including environmental plans. And we arrange new financing in modern form of sustainability-linked loan. It means that a part of our financing is dedicated strictly to environmental goals and supporting us in this area. A part of the financing is dedicated for debt refinancing, I mean the debt being in balance of the company. At the moment we signed agreement with banks, and there are like general corporate investment also covered by new financing. The range of finances in 1.65 billion Polish zloty is expressed in different currencies, including Polish zloty, euro and dollars. Of course, a company like GSW being perceived as a company having negative impact on the environment because we are dealing with coal. And financial institutions, especially having headquarters abroad, does not like companies like we, because coal is still has negative perception. And it's difficult with this education process, how to convince international institutions on the financial market that we are a very important element in this transition process. So far, we were able to convince all Polish institutions, including banks and not only banks. This is the structure of our new financing. There are biggest Polish banks in place in the consortium, and funds like PZU or other state-owned funds. Unfortunately, because we applied for new financing to international banks, they were not interested to support our strategy and to support green transition using coking coal at all. But it's interesting that in the agreement of financing with banks, there are like some important elements which are crucial from this perspective of environmental protection, and which will be the subject of reporting to banks, and which will be reviewed by independent reviewer year by year, because we declared that we will decrease the impact on the environment by reduction of GHG emission, mainly by methane emission, up to 27% till 2026, by capture of methane, up to 50% until 2026, and utilization of captured methane up to 95% in 2026. From this perspective, we will pay higher or lower margin related to the financing to banks, and the part of the margin will, in case we will not follow the goals in this environmental area, we will pay to non-governmental organizations dealing with environmental protection or education in this field, or dealing with social responsibility. So that's the way I would like to say to all of you about the core business of the company, which is perceived as, negatively impacting the environment, what is not true. And to repeat the mission of the company, that the green transition begins 1,000 meters deep underground in mines of JSW in Poland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert, for giving us a very good introduction as to how you're having to deal with the challenges of making change with an industry such as in coal. Thank you for that. So, and our next speaker is myself. Thank you, Hester. I speak to a lot of clients, and we need to start talking about the longer-term goals of 2050, the net zero. They start saying, well, isn't that impossible? Mining is a energy-intensive business. We can't choose where we want to be. We can't all be in Sweden or where there's going to be low-carbon electricity. We can't always have trucks being powered by electricity, because we need to be flexible. The geology is complex. We need to be nimble. We need to be able to adapt. And it's another economic burden. How is this going to be possible? How do we get to this net zero position? But before answering that one, I think the first thing to do is, okay, well, why do we need to reduce the emission? Obviously, part of it is going to be for climate change, to reduce the rate of growth to it. The Paris Agreement, to achieve 1.5, you have to have a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. Now, most mining companies are targeting 30%, which will be about below the 2-degree mark. But that's still a fantastic rate of change that I've never seen anywhere before. To be able to get your permission to operate, a number of countries are adopting carbon budgets. If your project is going to use up a large chunk of that carbon budget, the answer may be no, you can't have a project. There's going to be the taxes, which we touched on earlier, but Bernard, carbon taxes are going to be a good source of income, as well as being a good penalty and a good incentive for change. We want finance. The banks, the lenders, the equity investors, they're saying, we want to see change. We're not going to support companies, and this is the challenge that Robert was finding as far as getting the money for change. Companies are wanting to do the right thing. They're wanting to make change, and they're making statements saying this is what we will do. And once they're making these statements publicly, then if a fund says, well, we've invested in you because we're a green fund and we believe what you're going to do, and you don't do it, you don't deliver at the level of ambition that is expected, you can expect lawsuits. We've got customers who want to change. So Volkswagen is saying, well, we're going to use green steel in our products. So there's all this pressure is coming on. So it's not a case of, the industry can't just say this is too hard. We're going to have to make the changes. Fortunately, most companies are making changes. So you can see a lot of companies have made statements saying we're going to be working towards significant changes and reductions in our business. Most of them targeting around 30% by the end of 2030. Now 2030, that's only 6 years away. The low-hanging fruit is being plucked. There's a lot of challenges which are out there to be able to achieve it, but the rate of change within the industry at the moment is significant. Step one that everybody takes is to be able to switch to renewable energy where possible. If you're in the Nordic countries or some other countries, hey, no problems. You've already got low carbon electricity, so that's easy. It's a job done. If you're in Poland, it's a bit more difficult. But as you can see from the graph on the bottom right, many of the countries, there are changes, there are moves towards low carbon electricity, and many of the countries are targeting to have 80% low carbon by 2030. So there's going to be some big changes. There's going to be some problems because everybody wants low carbon electricity. So we're moving towards electric vehicles, which increases our consumption. So there's going to be a massive growth in the electricity. And the wind does not blow all the time, and the sun doesn't shine all the time. So, where's the low carbon going to come from? One of the key areas is going to be small modular or advanced modular reactors. Now, sometimes it's going to be governments or going to be national electricity providers who will put this in, but in some cases it's going to be companies. So, like in this case, KGHM is looking to have some small modular reactors installed into an old power station to be able to enable it to meet its carbon targets. One of the other big sources of emissions is diesel, what we use in our transportation. Now, one big 220-ton truck is 2,300 tons of carbon dioxide a year. I have a fleet of 40 of those, and that's quite a large number. Around the world, there's 18,000 of these. That's a very large number. That's just the 220-ton size. Move up to the 320, and so on. So great, let's electrify. Let's go for conveyors, trolley assist, batteries, all these solutions. Sure, these are all solutions, but if you're going to electrify, well, first of all, you need to have low emission energy. Otherwise, you're just moving the problem. Renewable diesel, great option, but certainly in Europe, it's a very small source, and it has some issues as to where you're going to grow the feedstock to be able to supply it. And of course, each of these options is a change, it's a difference. If you're going to put in a conveyor, if you're going to put trolley assist in, it's going to change your mine design, it's a change of your mining sequence, it's a change. So there's a lot of thinking that still needs to be done, and it takes time for these to happen. It might take you 4 years to develop the ramp, to be able to put in the conveyor system, put in the trolley assist. So to achieve the 2030 targets, a lot of ideas need to be thought about now. Talk about methane, coal, within the coal mining district. Methane, why is it important? Because it's 80 times more potent as a global, as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. But if you burn methane, convert it into carbon dioxide, it goes from 80 down to 1. It's not 0, but it's a significant reduction. Now capturing the methane has been done for many, many years, because certainly for underground mines, methane is a significant safety risk. So there's been various ways that people have looked at to try and reduce the amount of methane underground, but it's not always easy. Some geologies don't allow, they don't release the methane easily. Hopefully we'll be hearing from Raymond Pilcher in a moment, who's a coal mine methane specialist, on some of the various opportunities there. If you can capture the methane from the coal bed directly, we concentrate it enough. You can either put it directly into your natural gas grids, or you can use it to generate electricity, and that's all free. So there's opportunities there, but it's going to require a lot more thinking. The traditional way for underground mines to deal with the methane is to ventilate it. Just pump it all out. But unfortunately, once it's diluted, it's very difficult to capture, and therefore it's not necessarily the solution. As was mentioned earlier by Bernard, people are able to see things. With the satellites these days, we can see where methane hotspots are, as the chart on the top right shows. So it is something that's going to be watched a lot. So big opportunity, a challenge, but it's a necessity. New technology. You can be smarter with your processing. The guys at COMEX outside would love to tell you about how they are helping companies pre-concentrate the ore. So instead of processing 100% of the ore, let's process 10% of the ore. Save us a lot of effort and energy. You can change to technology such as high-pressure grinding rolls, which are more efficient. And you can change, instead of smelting, you can go to leaching. Instead of using standard cement, use low-carbon cement. So there's a lot of ideas here to work with. Got a lot of pressure coming in from other sources. We're not a bubble. Our downstream users are saying that the smelters emit far more than the miners do, but they're under a lot of pressure. Now they're going to want different quality feed. They're going to be wanting a lot of change. Now at the moment they're making first steps, which is let's use renewable, let's be a bit more efficient. Then they're going to go in and say, okay, let's retrofit things, and then eventually they're going to move to say, I don't want this product, I want that product. Instead of direct smelting ores, I'm going to go for magnetites. So there's going to be some changes in the market coming through there. Carbon capture and usage. When you've got a point source which is emitting a lot of carbon dioxide, if you've got also a location, a grid system such as supplying natural gas, or you've got coal mines, you've actually got an opportunity to be able to capture some of this carbon and then pump it back underground. Europe actually, in this case, is actually quite well placed because we've got a big natural gas network. So the North Sea, it's got lots of coal fields which could take the gas. We've got lots of pipelines already in place which can take the gas. We've got lots of coal mines where the seams, you can pump it underground. So there's a lot of opportunities to be able to capture. Not easy, but it's one of the targets that the cement industry is looking at. As miners, we have to think about these things. We have to be aware of it because, on one hand we use cement, on the other hand we sell a product to smelters. So, how is this going to affect our business? Think about how can we support it, how can we drive it, how can we encourage it. So all of these aspects are going to be part of our thinking. The way we make decisions, now traditionally, best MPV, let's go for that. Let's go for the highest IRR, that's the answer. Well, what about the emissions? How do you balance now a second metric in the equation? So one option is to use carbon charges or shadow carbon charges. So, okay, you may not be taxed, or the taxation might have some exemptions at the moment or so on, but let's put a cost on it. So a number of companies are putting costs onto the various options. Do I go open pit or underground? What's going to be the emissions of each? So one has got this direct cash flow impact, but if I then put a shadow carbon charge in, okay, well that now converts an idea such as the amount of emissions into a cash value. I can then add that and make an adjusted cash flow. I can now have an adjusted NPV, IRR. I can now evaluate the options. I can then put these options together as part of a marginal abatement cost curve. So, the ideas on the left-hand side, they earn money, they save me money, they're a good idea to do anyway. Now perhaps I need a bit more capital, but this is where you go speak with the banks with the sustainability loans, because then you can show this is going to be a good idea, you just need some more capital for it. So you want to do that, so it doesn't necessarily cost the money. In the middle, you've got initiatives which just about break even. But hey, it's not costing you anything. At the same time, it's reducing your emissions, so let's do that. Then you've got some ones which are going to cost you a bit, but when you include a shadow carbon charge, well, maybe this is going to be the solution to do that. And then you've got the ideas on the right-hand side, which are going to cost you a lot. Let's maybe think a bit more about it. Let's see how technology evolves. Let's look at some other ideas first, before we have to commit to those more expensive solutions. So, in summary, it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be an easy one. It's a lot of new ideas, a lot of new thinking, a lot of new activities that have to be done. But the industry is embracing it. There's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of things happening. I was reading in the news this morning as far as, like in Australia, that well-known coal capital, the amount of renewable energy this morning was 71% of total electricity generation. So there is big changes that are happening. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think we can do it. And finish with this quote from Robert Browning. And if we don't aim for it, if we don't try to reach it, we won't get there. But I think that we can do. So, how do we eat the net zero elephant? Well, quite simple, one bite at a time. Thank you. So, changing hats, I'd like to invite Raymond Pilcher and Michael Drabik to talk about coal mining as a multi-purpose platform. This is an online talk, and so take it away.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael Drabik. I'm the secretary of the UNEC Group of Experts on Coal Mine, Methane and Just Transition. And I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present on this very important event. I apologize I cannot be in person in Wrocław. And I'm also sorry I won't be able to stay for Q&A session because I have another commitment that I cannot skip. But thank you very much for giving me a chance to anyway deliver this presentation. It's a presentation that it's developed jointly with Mr. Raymond Pilcher, who unfortunately cannot be with us here, even online, but you will see his presentation, a recording of his presentation following my presentation. So we're going to be talking about coal mining as a multi-purpose platform and how this can help with just transition. And this basically going to be covered by Mr. Pilcher. What I'm going to talk about for the next couple of minutes is who we actually are and what we do to give you the picture of, some sort of credibility that we have. And I was actually very happy to hear from JSW about the work on coal mine methane. We actually cooperate with JSW on those issues for a number of years already, and JSW is a part of one of our centers of excellence that we have. I will be talking about it in a moment. And I think that this is a proof somehow that we are very much open and receptive to the concerns of the private sector, and unlike many other organizations, public organizations that are out there, we are trying to be very inclusive and take under consideration the problems that the private sector is facing as well. So with this, let me tell you a bit about who we are. So UNEC, in general, as a commission, is one of the regional commissions of the United Nations, one of the 5. What you see now on the slide is not very precise. What's important here is that we cover basically the whole northern hemisphere of the planet. We were set up in 1947, and we unite 56 member states, which are European states, but also ex-Soviet Union states, United States, and Canada. It's important to mention that all other member states of the United Nations can participate in our work, as can also international organizations, non-governmental organizations, representatives of civil society, and private sector. So our region produces around 30% of world's energy and consumes around 45%. It produces nearly 50% of global economic output, and unfortunately, fossil fuels are still 60% of the primary fuel in our region, and again, unfortunately, our region accounts for more or less half of global emissions. So our aim as an organization is to promote pan-European economic integration. We are a platform for dialogue, and we try to facilitate greater economic integration. As you all know, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and those goals constitute the principal framework for the work of the United Nations, and this of course includes also UNECE. And for us, from the point of view of this conference, but also the division that I work for is the Sustainable Energy Division, the Sustainable Development Goal number 7 is the most important because it talks about sustainable energy for the world. The way how we see it at UNECE, it's somehow different. I mean, it's a nuance, but we talk rather not about sustainable energy as such, but about energy for sustainable development, which actually opens the door for us to deal with much broader range of issues, including social issues, and this is why we work also on just transition matters. So our group of experts is a team of specialists, and this team of specialists is being overseen by the intergovernmental body, which is the Committee on Sustainable Energy. So there is a number of sectoral committees in the Commission. One of them is Committee on Sustainable Energy, which basically guides our work and makes sure that we stay within the mandate and that we deliver on the needs of member states. So the Sustainable Energy Committee, it has 6 subsidiary bodies. Those are all a group of experts. And this is a group of experts on energy efficiency, renewable energy, resource management, cleaner electricity systems, natural gas, and coal mine methane and just transition. I put in red the last one because that's the one that I'm the secretary of, and that's the one that I would like to tell you a bit more about at the moment. So we were established in 2004, so we've been on the market for 20 years already. We unite around 500 experts from all around the world, and these are not just experts which has pure technical knowledge on coal mine methane related matters. These are also scientists, geologists, economists, lawyers, government officers, politicians, equipment manufacturers, you name it. The goal is to have as broad perspective as possible, to have as informed dialogue as possible so that we can serve later member states with our recommendations related to policies as well as possible. So again, as I was mentioning from the very beginning, we are kind of a platform for dialogue between the governments, but also between the governments and civil society and private sector. This is our exact mandate. I'm not going to read it. It's a very long sentence and very much written in the UN language, which is a bit difficult. I mean, it takes a moment to digest it because it's very much packed with the information. I believe that the presentation is going to be available to the participants later, so you can read it yourself later. But what's important here is that our work is based on 4 pillars, so environment, economy, working safety, social justice, and it means that our activities include mining hazards, those related to methane, then methane emission monitoring, reporting, verification, and mitigation. So we deal with issues like capture, destruction, and use of methane, and then also matters related to transition, such as mine closure, land repurposing, and the social aspects of the whole process, meaning just transition. We're focusing in our work on the whole value chain, coal value chain, and the whole coal mine life cycle. We have 3 task forces on safe operations and closure of mines, on methane emission reductions, and on transition of the coal sector. We are very inclusive and open, so I encourage all of you to contact me, and the last slide is going to be my contact details. And if you would like to join or participate in the work of our task forces, of our group, you are more than welcome. The strength of our group comes from the strength of our experts. So each of you would be an added value, and for you it would be an opportunity to influence some UN processes related to the field that you are working in. We also have 2 centers of excellence in China and in Poland, which help us to have a better reach to the stakeholders in those countries, but not only in those countries, but also in the regions. And as I said, one of those is in Poland. And it's composed of 6 very important players, actors in the coal field in Poland, and this is the Central Mining Institute, Polish Geological Institute, Institute of Oil and Gas, AGH Technical University, and then JSW and PGG. So again, it shows that we are open to listen to the private sector, to the coal mining companies. We are willing to work with them. And again, we believe that we have a very balanced approach, especially compared to some other institutions out there that you may have experience with. We have a very balanced approach, fact-based approach. We are trying to avoid all those emotional debate about energy and environment. We are trying to really work on those matters and see what's possible and what can be delivered. Of course, with some goals of getting more greener, as we all care about the planet, but also we're trying to find solutions that are viable and possible to be implemented. And then we developed 3 best practice guidelines documents on methane emissions from active coal mines, from abandoned coal mines, and also a document on monitoring, reporting, and verification of such emissions from the coal sector. Now, moving to the transition, which is basically the main part of the presentation that you will hear from Mr. Pilcher, we believe that modernization cannot be avoided or delayed. It's already happening on different pace in different countries, but it's already happening. So we try to help states to plan and implement the transition of their coal mining regions. And we stress the importance of the social and cultural dimension. It means very much the discussion on transition is focused on financial, technological, and environmental matters. Not so much sometimes speaking, forgotten the social aspect and in particular cultural aspect. What I mean by cultural, I don't really have time now to dive into it. I would be happy to talk with each of you if you would like to contact me and then discuss this issue. But what I mean by this is that coal mining for centuries have been much more than an occupation. It was actually, in many places in the world, some sort of a culture with its own traditions, with its own beliefs, with its own customs. And we believe that this has to be preserved, regardless of the fate of the industry as such. The cultural dimension needs to be preserved because this also would ease the acceptance, it would ease the process for the people, and it would help with the acceptance of the proposed changes if people see that it's just about changing somehow the way how they work, but not about changing the whole identity. We also work on identifying elements that are necessary to enable the start and progress of just transition. We develop tools to facilitate a transition, and we also offer a new approach to coal, about which you will hear from Mr. Pilcher. So this is our definition of just transition. Again, I'm not going to read it, but what's important is that we believe that you need to have a comprehensive, system-wide approach to the whole problem, and this needs to encompass all those elements that I mentioned, so technology, environment, finance, but also social and cultural aspects. Because if not, the different projects, different ideas will be developed in silos. And we believe that what we're trying to do with the transition is to actually reinvent the whole coal mining regions. They have to completely change their economic profiles. So all those things need to be taken into consideration at the same time, because all this needs to work together. If not, it's going to be done in silos, and it's not going to add up to the general strategy which will allow for actual transformation of the region. We also are perfectly aware that decarbonization creates not only opportunities, but it also entails very disruptive effects that will fall mostly on the people, on the shoulders of people and localities that are economically reliant currently on the energy-intensive industries. This is why we put the social justice as a priority. We believe that it's the duty of governments, but also organizations such as ours, to make sure that no one is left behind. And we very much believe in bottom-up engagement. So it shouldn't come just from the capitals telling people in the regions what should be done. We believe that we need to engage with people very much to know what are their aspirations, what are their plans for the regions, how they would like to see it, and to work with them. So it's working for them, but also with them. And we believe that it's necessary not just because it's politically correct to do that. We believe that it's necessary actually for the sake of sustainability of the results. Because if people don't feel the ownership of this whole process, it's going to be very hard to actually maintain the results. People need to feel that it's something that comes from them, to really believe in it, and then for the results to be sustainable. So, with that, you will now hear from Mr. Pilcher what's our approach to coal and how it fits to all this. And we believe that the approach which Mr. Pilcher will be talking about very much facilitates the transition, because it's removing certain barriers to the transition that exists right now. You saw on the screen my contact details, so if you have any questions to me related to the presentation, or if you would like to join, and I hope you would like to join our group of experts and support our work, please do that. We are very inclusive. We work with many private companies, and we'll be happy to work with you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. The next presentation is going to be has been recorded.
Good morning. I'm Ray Pilcher. I apologize for not being in Wrocław with you this morning. I'd love to be there, but I'm in Western Colorado, so I'm sending you a recording instead. I'm sorry that I won't be able to join you later during questions, because it'll be the middle of my night, and I don't think I'd be that bright anyway. I want to talk to you after my colleague Michael Drobic just gave you an introduction to our approach to just transition. I want to talk a little bit more about coal mines and our new approach to coal mining. You know, in the past, we've considered coal only as a source of fuel, or maybe even chemical feedstock to be used in making cement or steel. However, I think that this probably ignores some of the other value that could be realized if we do additional research and reconsider the deposits that we've been mining all these years. We believe that there's a higher value for some coal deposits in it lies in the potential to refine and utilize the carbon that exists within the coal, but also other high-value materials that might accompany either in the coal itself or in the surrounding strata. Our proposed approach creates new opportunities for economic development. How do we do this? Well, it's by preserving or even creating new jobs that will facilitate the transition from using that coal as a fuel that creates a lot of CO2 and other particulate matter, and actually start to use it for a higher value. This also mitigates the risk of stranded coal deposits. It gives a financial incentive for investors to rethink their approach to coal. If you're associated with the coal mining industry, you probably know by now that we've seen a precipitous drop in the value of the coal industry over the last several years. The coal mining sector was valued at about $1.27 trillion in 2011. But by 2020, the value of the sector was judged to be only worth about 500 billion USD. Now, part of that had to do with the pandemic. But even today, in 2023, the value is somewhere above 600 billion USD, something somewhere in the order of 629 to 630 billion dollars. Still, that's about half of what it was in 2011. I think we all know that the erosion of value is due to the pressure on the electric power industry to move from coal to lower carbon intensity fuels. It's also in some regions, like the United States, due to the favorable pricing of natural gas and the lower cost of renewables. I don't think we're going to see a difference in this trend. I think we're going to probably see a continued erosion of the value of the coal mining sector, except for when we talk about using it as metallurgical coal. We believe that new business models can be developed for active and idle mines, and even look at mines that have been closed and the waste associated with those abandoned or closed coal mines, and think about remining those tailings. Recent work done by a number of researchers throughout the world has shown that rare earth elements occur in trace amounts in many coal deposits and in the enveloping strata, which is treated as waste. Acid mine drainage in some coal deposits mined in West Virginia have very high levels of rare earth elements and other valuable metals. Similar reports of trace element occurrences have taken place across the globe. We've seen reports in India and in China, and of course in a number of other places in the United States. We believe this to be the case in Europe as well. In fact, if we think about coal basins as essentially being catchment basins for all the material that's eroded from the country rock and moves in through the water, and as materials that are eroded and redeposited in swamps, it's not hard to imagine that there are probably all kinds of metals that end up in these coal deposits. In fact, we're very well acquainted with the materials that end up being pollutants, such as cadmium, selenium, and mercury. But other metals were accompanying these metals, particularly the lithophilic metals that are associated with the rare earth, the lanthanide series, and other metals that we don't normally think about as being associated with coal, such as cobalt, manganese, and other valuable materials like lithium. We found these to be in various places in the coal deposits, in the coal itself, and the interburden and the overburden. And of course, as I've mentioned, in some places we've seen them in acid mine drainage. And in fact, the concentrations in acid mine drainage in West Virginia were greater than those concentrations in the Mountain Pass deposit that occurs in California and has been so far been the only real viable rare earth metal deposit in the United States. I'm sure this is the case in other places as well. I've included this diagram that's from work that's being done presently. Actually, it's a paper that we've just finished and is being submitted for review on a publication in an international journal. This actually shows a diagram of how we see the asset value that I've been talking about realized through understanding and planning. On the left-hand side, we can see the asset value that we believe is being created, the materials and how it's being processed. You'll recognize many of these material processing technologies actually already exist. In fact, all of them already exist. Some of them are already in place at coal mines. The primary processing systems are essentially crushing, and then depending on what materials are being worked on, such as, say, water that's being recovered from the mine, we might be talking about electrolysis and creation of hydrogen. We might be increasing the number of circuits at the beneficiation plant to recover some of that water and actually some of the metals that are being removed during beneficiation. Or if we're in an abandoned site, we might be simply reprocessing some of the acid mine drainage. We also might be looking at the methanes associated with the coal deposit and involving pyrolysis of that methane and creating carbon nanotubes and hydrogen. So there are many different processes that we might be involved in. The pyrolysis might also involve taking the carbon and making graphene, or polymers, starches, etc. So all of these are possibilities, but these are all predicated on us knowing more about these deposits. As we go through this slide, we can see that we can go from one side of the asset that we recognize all the way through the beneficiation, the production, even shipping, which of course always exists around coal mines because you're either shipping maybe as short as across the road to a power plant, or you might be shipping across the country or even across the oceans. So all of these systems and infrastructures are in place, and the idea here is to take advantage of what's there in place and what we can do to increase the value. And finally, there's on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see some of the markets that we believe are possible and potential targets. To summarize what we've introduced today, I'd like to say a couple of things. One is that we recognize that there needs to be a dynamic shift in what we're thinking about when it comes to coal mining. There's a huge amount of money that's been invested in coal mining worldwide. What we can see is that the coal mining is not going to continue to exist the way it has in the past. We know that some coal mines are being shuttered and are probably never going to open again. But there are some coal mines that have valuable resources that have not been recognized. There is a high value for carbon as graphite, graphene, or carbon nanotubes, and there are other potential high value materials that are associated with these deposits, as I've described. We should be looking at these coal deposits and their mine waste and see if these valuable metals, rare earths, and other critical raw materials are in these coal mines that have infrastructure, connection to the electric grid, and potentially methane that can be used as another source of energy or as a raw material feedstock. Some abandoned mines do have abundant methane. If this isn't captured and used, it'll be vented. And that's another issue that we have, one that we can't withstand in this day of rapid climate change. So I'll leave you with these ideas. And again, I apologize for not being able to stick around and answer some questions and discuss this in a way that I'm sure would improve our ability to understand what we should be doing as next steps. With that, I'll say goodbye and hope to see you at another MINEX meeting down the road. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If there are questions you have with that, then please make a note, and then we can then send them to Michael and Raymond afterwards by email. So for our last of the presentations, I'd like to invite Johnny Ritter from MTS, who's going to be talking about how technology is going to help us achieve a greener future.
Cool. Okay, so good morning everyone. I'll try and be quick because I realise we're running a bit over time. But I'm Johnny Forster from MTS, and so MTS is a technology company or a consulting company that specialises in helping mines make the maximum of technology and helping them use technology to improve their productions and efficiencies in the operations. So this talk today is just going to quickly go over how you can use technology to help hopefully reduce some of your carbon emissions in mining. So we'll quickly go over carbon emissions in mining, and then we'll go over some of the most obvious technologies which are quite apparent and currently used in the industry. And we'll also go over some of the less obvious solutions which might be more applicable to some of the operations here in Poland. Okay. Okay. So, carbon emissions and mining. So we probably all know that the mining industry has quite a lot of carbon emissions. So around 7% of greenhouse gas emissions are from the mining industry. Interestingly, when you're comparing surface operations to underground operations, the surface operations are nearly twice as carbon intense from a gold mining perspective. So there's obviously quite a lot of focus on surface operations, but we thought today it'd be quite good to talk about underground operations, because if underground operations are already the greenest method possible, how can we use technology to make that greener? Okay, so obviously as the grades get lower, mines get deeper, cost rises, etc. The challenges to make underground mining more sustainable is going to be increasing and getting more challenging. So the easiest way to reduce their emissions, we think, is to embrace technology. So we think mining greener is mining smarter. In that way, that's using technology, mining technology to help reduce carbon emissions in the industry. So what technologies are currently available which can help reduce emissions in the industry? So the most obvious thing to do is focus on the most energy intensive aspect of the operations. So as Dave's alluded to, if we can focus on reducing the energy consumption, we can hopefully reduce the carbon emissions that way. So from underground mining, ventilation is really one of the most obvious ways, largest producer of energy. So it takes up around 50% of a mine's energy usage is in ventilation. So if we can harness technology to help reduce the reliance and the impact of ventilation, then we can therefore reduce the carbon intensity of the operation. So we'll just quickly go over some of the most obvious ways to reduce the ventilation demands. So one of them, as we've alluded to already in this session, is battery electric vehicles. So these are quite common now in the industry. You can get battery electric scoops and trucks and drills, and obviously with zero diesel emissions, they can reduce the heat, reducing the cooling requirements, and therefore you can reduce your energy costs or your energy consumption by between 50 to 60%. So that's an obvious way of reducing your energy demands. And another key one is ventilation on demand. So this is using sensors and proximity location within the underground operations to better control when and where you need ventilation. This can be linked to personnel tracking or can be linked to vehicle movements, and it's about making sure you're using ventilation in the most optimal way possible. So again, this can, we've seen this reduce energy costs by as much as 50%. So again, a really key technology to use to help reduce the energy consumption from the operation. And the third kind of final, fairly obvious solution is tele-remote equipment. So again, this is becoming more apparent in the industry. We've seen this used quite a lot in some of the deeper operations. And again, this is a key way of reducing the energy requirements by just removing the personnel. If the equipment can be controlled from the surface, for example, it reduces a lot of the ventilation requirements. And we can see, especially at shallow operations, we've seen this require 75% less air than running the diesel equipment. So those are the three kind of obvious technology solutions which can be used in the industry. But are there any other alternatives? So the ones I've just mentioned there, they're quite capital expensive, especially if you've got a brownfield operation. Are you going to be investing in that technology if you've only got a short mine life left, but you've still got requirements to try and reduce your carbon emissions? And also those technologies that we've discussed, they're great, but they're also quite complex to install and are challenging to maintain. So you need experts in those fields to make sure those technologies are running to the best of their abilities. So are there any other alternatives which maybe are less capital intense, which can also add value and reduce the carbon emissions of the industry? So equipment health and equipment data. So lots of new mining equipment has lots of data on board. We see a lot of equipment generating gigabytes of data each day. And just analysing this data, which is already there. So in some cases, the data already exists. It's just a case of looking at this data in a bit more detail and finding ways that this can reduce your carbon emissions. So one of the ways we like to do this is by looking at idling. So this is looking at engine RPMs, seeing when the equipment's idling, should it be idling, could the engine be keyed off in this moment, for example. So what we do is we like to look at this data, visualize it, making sure the operations are looking at it, and we see this, some of our operations reduce CO2 emissions by 450 tons annually. So again, the great advantage for this is it's cheap, the data already exists, it's just a matter of you guys looking at that data. Another kind of less obvious solution is payload optimization. So again, lots of equipment comes with own payload scales now, or there's various third-party solutions like LoadScan, which you can use to scan the trays and to get payload optimization that way. So we find this helps to understand and optimize payloads, and it can also reduce carryback, which ultimately is reducing your liters per ton. So again, we've worked operations where we've reduced their underloading by 10%, and this has had a significant impact in their liters per ton. So again, it's reducing carbon emissions in maybe slightly less obvious ways, but it's a great way of, again, low cost, but potentially high impact. So potentially, you can reduce your fuel emissions by 35% by just reducing your deviation in your payloads from 30% to 0%. So again, there's a clear savings to be made there. And then the third one is material identification. So again, some technology which we think can be used to help reduce carbon emissions is material identification. So that's installing buckets, material identification on the buckets of some of the scoops. We see this helps to reduce dilution, which ultimately can reduce your haulage costs, reduce your crushing costs, and therefore it can reduce your energy consumption per ton. So again, it's just a less obvious way, but a way of using technology to reduce your carbon emissions. And then finally, data collection and utilization. So again, another trend we see in the industry is the increase in fleet management systems and task management systems, especially in the underground space. There's quite a few solutions out there now, which the great thing about these is they're generating data which your operation might not have been aware of before. So it allows them to see exactly how the operation is performing, and if you can measure how well your operation is performing, you can analyze it and you can drive efficiencies that way. So kind of the key areas we look at here is TKM, so tons kilometers per hour, and tons per liters. So before, especially in the underground space, it was really hard for operations to understand these and accurately record them on a daily basis. But using these kind of fleet management and task management solutions, it gives the operations that data. With that data, they can make decisions and they can see the trends, and they can target efficiencies that way. So again, it's just a slightly less obvious way of using technology to reduce your carbon emissions. So then, in summary, embracing and implementing technology can be great. There's obviously some more expensive solutions that we looked at, so battery electric, tele-remote, and ventilation on demand. So those are great if you've got lots of money and you've got the capital behind them. But potentially, if you're an operation that's got less disposable income, potentially a brownfield operation, then there's lots and lots of other solutions where technology can help. So it's about better utilization of the data you already have, and that can drive your carbon reduction strategy that way. So yeah, just to close, we find mining greener, you're going to be mining smarter, and the best way to do that is to utilize mining technology. Cool. So any questions there?
I think we'll take the questions now. So we've got time for some questions. We've got also on this panel got Mark Burnett from the EITI here to be able to also answer some questions. So as was started yesterday, I shall abuse the moderator's position and ask the first question. So to Mark, how do you think that the EITI standard can help companies achieve the net zero ambitions?
Great, thank you, David. And I would just start by maybe picking up on your analogy of swallowing the elephant. Swallowing it whole is very difficult, especially when you're looking at a standard. So I would mention a few of the bite-sized pieces that the EITI standard offers that are relevant to reducing emissions in mining. And I think in 2023, in June, we introduced an updated version of our standard. And one of the key new requirements is around greenhouse gas emissions disclosure at the project level. And I think that's quite important. We've been talking about this kind of across the conference the last couple of days. And when operators are able to demonstrate their emissions at the project level, that can really offer a lot of benefits in terms of the pathway toward net zero, cost of financing, which we've discussed. So I think that's an important element of the standard. As well, we've been talking the last couple of days about social license to operate or social license to explore. And I think that is a really important new element of our standard, which is free, prior, and informed consent. And that is very important in the EITI context of the licensing process. So it's disclosure about what are the sort of community and local community engagement provisions that are involved in licensing. So I think that's quite an important aspect there that we've touched on.
Thank you very much, Mark. Moving along, so to Robin. The loan that you went for was a sustainability-linked loan, and you also used that to refinance some of your other loans. How did you find that the process of getting that loan and the advantages of having a sustainability-linked loan rather than just a standard corporate financing approach?
Thank you for the question. The answer is quite easy because there is no other option. We could only apply for this new way of financing, the sustainability loan, because traditional corporate finance is no longer available for companies like JSW making business in the mining industry. And even considering that the product we are offering to our customers is like very special, as I mentioned before, is critical raw material on the list of EU accepted, and it doesn't matter for financial institutions because there still is the perception of coal industry in Poland especially is negative. So we had to convince financial market, linked it to only Polish market. It's because banks with headquarters abroad at the beginning said no, it's no way, no option to finance coal industry in Poland. And I think that because we received like clear message from banks after initial discussions, what sort of finance we can get from them, supporting the company, providing the steel industry with very crucial, important product in form of coke for steel production. It was the only one simple answer. You can apply only for sustainability loan. There is no other option. So you have to convince us that your strategy is following all these, official regulations like Fit for 55 and others, but that you are respecting all these environmental protection goals and targets. And in case you convince us, you have the green light to get the finance. And of course, the business transition has two ways in our case, because we are doing ourselves on our field, in our activity, all these strategy elements helping us to reach the limitations in emission of CO2, our carbon footprint. So as I mentioned before, by 2030 we are going to reduce by 30% of greenhouse emission to the atmosphere, especially in this form of methane reduction, as I mentioned before. But of course we are doing much more because we are arranging new like supply of green energy for the for our activity, just to replace energy coming from traditional producers in Poland based on steam coal, and to assure the company with renewables. And we plan to build own sources of green energy using this area after post-industrial areas related to our mines. And we plan to sign a green PPA agreement with external supplier of green energy to the company, and of course to use in to a higher extent of methane, which can allow us to get for internal purposes energy as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Very comprehensive answer. So Johnny, moving on, so you talk about green mining being smart mining, but also smart mining is green mining. What do you see that the obstacles are for companies in using the data that they've already got?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's something we see quite a lot in the industry. Is people come to us and they ask us, okay, we've got this data, how do we look at it? And there's a few challenges I think they have. One of them is data overload. So as I was saying, lots of modern equipment produces a lot of data now, and so you're talking gigabytes of data a day per machine. So it's about looking at that massive data source and picking out the bits which are important to you, and the bits which are nice to have, and the bits that are completely irrelevant you don't need to look at. I think a lot of our clients try and use all the data. They think they need to try and utilize 100% of it, when actually utilizing 5% of it. So for example, just looking at the payload data generates a lot more value than just trying to do everything at once and getting completely fatigued and overwhelmed by all the data available. And I think the other kind of key point there is data quality. So, okay, yeah, you might have the data already, but if no one's been looking at that data for the last whatever number of years, you've no idea what quality that data's at. So it might be like your payload system is completely messed up and then the payload's coming from the machine is completely wrong. So it's important that once you do start to look at that data, look at the quality of that data, and you need to have some kind of procedure and processes in place to make sure you can cleaning that data, calibrating the sensors. If something goes wrong, if you've got someone to call who's going to clean that data up, because yeah, like the kind of obvious saying is bad data in, bad data out. So yeah, it's important that your quality's there and that you're looking at the right kind of data.
So Johnny, so moving to Bernard. So as far as you talked about the opportunities and the risks, and obviously in Europe we've got a wide range of legal jurisdictions and so on. So what do you see as being the key barriers to change? Is it the number of jurisdictions? Is it bureaucratic inertia? Is it political will to be able to say that actually the law needs to change to enable these other changes to happen?
I think it's a combination of these. I think there is a complex web of interests, and I'm not sure that it's just the legal frameworks that legal frameworks are the result, but really the sort of changing political imperatives and socioeconomic pressures. Really, I mean, even if you take the 27 EU member states, they're nominally on the same page, but actually they really aren't. I mean, the elections in Poland a few days ago were a close shave, and I think they're sort of going in the right direction. But I do think that you now have a more complex layer than ever before of nation states, big companies, NGOs. There's a law firm that specializes in class actions against big companies, including mining companies, and they've just given something ridiculous like a £500 million facility to pursue these class actions. So that's not really good news in terms of keeping the cost low, because it means you'll have to engage more lawyers, you'll have to go through hundreds of thousands of documents again. So it's getting more complex and more challenging. And as a result, I really like the point you made about having sort of different investment proposals, different choices. Perhaps the most straightforward one might no longer be the right one, because you have to upfront a lot of legal costs as well to really analyze the framework. And I mean, we as disputes lawyers often find when we talk to companies in the early stages, they say, do we really want to spend sort of an extra 2,000 or 3,000 on lawyers? But oftentimes that initial expenditure then really pays off at the end. So it is becoming more challenging, and there are barriers, but equally there are solutions.
All right, I hope that's whetted the appetite, and I'd like to hand over to the audience. Questions? As yesterday, if you have a question, please come to the front, introduce yourself, and ask away.
Thank you. Tim Buistre from the Department for Business and Trade. Someone mentioned early on, maybe David or Bernhard, that the EU will have a target of 40% domestic production of critical raw materials by 2030, I think that was it, which I guess, by the way, will help JSW. But my question is, do you have any indication that that's going to be enforced in any way, perhaps through trade policy measures, through rules of origin or preferential tariff measures? Does anyone have any idea on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I was the one who mentioned it, but I do think the EU is going to try to enforce it. But what I think might happen in reality is that the target might get pushed. So, for example, with electric cars, what we've seen recently is the governments were saying it's X date, and then they realized, well, actually, we don't have the charging infrastructure, so let's make it X date plus 5 years. So I think there will be enforcement mechanisms, but I do think there will be a dose of realism as well on the legislator side.
Okay, thank you.
More questions?
Too short. Tanya McLeaver with WSP Mining UK. A question for Robert. I was very sad to hear when you said the perception of the coal industry in Poland is not a positive one. It's just mind-boggling to me. How can it be? You know, it's such a big part of the life of this country, and how come this message doesn't get out? What is happening? When did it start happening? How did it change?
Thank you for the question. In fact, that the perception is negative because Poland is mainly the producer of steam coal at all. Yes, it's the start of this transformation aimed to replace dirty energy replaced by renewables. And as we are in the group of mining industry in Poland at all, and as we apply to financial institutions with requests about providing us with new financing, supporting the implementation of strategy, which is aimed to reach climate goals as well, as we are supporting the climate changes. But because the product named coal doesn't matter, is mining related to coking coal and coke production, important in terms of all these climate change elements like electromobility, like wind farms, like PV farms, like storage of green energy. And we are the first element in this chain of value. But nobody understands that as we cancel the mining industry in this field of coking coal, we will reduce the chance to implement the transformation as well. Coal is coal for banks. That's the problem.
Thanks for that. We've got time for about one or two more questions. So, next.
Coffee.
Good morning. I'm Graham Farrer from Growth Mining. Question for you, Bernhard, and we've spoken about it a bit offline, but this challenge around renewable energy in particular, and some human rights in Norway and biodiversity in Finland, by memory it's golden eagle and flying squirrel. So there's a lot of pushback against these wind farms. Is it as simple as authentic dialogue and free, prior and informed consent, or is it something more?
I think it's something more. And as you say, we spoke about it briefly. I think there are a number of interests at play, and I think the geopolitics are becoming more complex than ever. I mean, Greta Thunberg is an excellent example, because I don't think that she's acting entirely alone. I don't think she woke up one morning and said, I want to advocate for these rights. I think there's a wider movement, and it's partly opportunistic, but also partly ingrained in deep sort of fears of large companies and the hatred that was proliferated in Germany against the transatlantic investment partnership. That came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden there were people marching in the streets, sort of protesting against an obscure document that even lawyers don't really understand. It was quite remarkable. So I do think you're exactly right. There is something deeper at play, and it's not as simple as just engaging, because even if you engage, if you get consent, we get that in African countries a lot, you might be able to get the village elders on your side, but if then there's a shift in the government itself, then the elders' loyalty might suddenly change, and so there's no kind of universal protection, and I think all you can do is really do your best, and sort of the phrase that often comes to mind is sort of hope for the best but prepare for the worst, which I guess keeps us in business, but it's it's not a simple answer, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Sorry, last question before coffee.
Thanks, Dave. A question for Robert. You spoke about the initiatives. Sorry, Peter Myers from SIK Consulting. Robert, you spoke about the initiatives that your company is putting in place to clean up your act, I guess, to put it bluntly. What sort of leverage or contact can you bring to bear with your customers? Because clearly your customers use your product and they have their emissions that are part of the chain. But if you're seeing issues gaining finance to implement your initiatives, perhaps it's your customers' problem as well.
Yes, you're right. But the problem is that, of course, coking coal is a product which is traded internationally. And Europe is importing or using in steel plants roughly 55 million tons of coking coal. And we are delivering 12 million tons of coking coal to the market. So there are like alternatives to import coal from Australia or USA or Colombia. It's not a problem to replace coal produced by JSW with another one. But the carbon footprint related to coal imported from like far destination like Australia, you can calculate how big it is. So from the perspective of our customer, of course it's like cheaper to have a local producer of coking coal and coke, because it's calculation of coke production, and we are a reliable supplier of material to steel plants as well. It's very important. But of course, in this radical situation, if the financial market and regulations issued by authorities in EU will finish this activity in Europe, like JSW, in this case, steel producers are in position to replace the coal supplied by us with the coal supplied by Australian producers, for example.
Thank you very much. I think the coffee is, well, I'm certainly feeling thirsty, so I think it is time for the coffee. I'd like to thank our panellists once again for their very informative talks. Thank you.